Tonight, councils warn of a national crisis and call for urgent help so they don't go bankrupt. Local leaders say we could be about to see the end of local government. We have a special report. A mass screening of police officers leads to 9 criminal investigations. I'll be speaking to Home Office Minister Chris Philp. Meanwhile, Labour want a new plan to tackle children not turning up at school. I'll speak to the Shadow Education Secretary, that's Bridget Phillipson. Rishi Sunak tells the Commons the UK won't hesitate to attack Houthi targets in Yemen if they carry out more attacks in the Red Sea. And you don't want to make them angry. We'll look at when speakers get grumpy. All that and more with Heidi Alexander and Liam Fox, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Local councils. Not exactly the glamorous end of politics, but, we all care if the local library is shut down or if they can't afford to heat your local swimming pool anymore, or if your overflowing rubbish bin isn't collected, then the foxes rip the bin bag open, nappies go tumbling all over your front garden. Not that I'm speaking from experience there, of course. And also, we'll all care if our council tax goes up too. Right now, honestly, it feels like local authorities are right up against the financial precipice. Some have already toppled over the edge. Nottingham, Birmingham, Woking, they've already gone bust, and there are fears that others may follow. It's also important to say, this is not a party political issue. Conservative councils are worried, and Conservative MPs too, 44 of whom have written to the Prime Minister, urging him to provide an emergency injection of funding for councils. The list includes Robert Jenrick, Greg Clark, Priti Patel, Therese Coffey, Damien Green, Brandon Lewis, Neil O'Brien, Heather Wheeler, Kit Malthouse and Jake Berry. Now, put it this way, it's pretty impressive to find anything that unites Damien Green and Priti Patel. Greg Clark and Jake Berry, they would probably disagree over what day of the week it was. So when that list of Conservatives have united around an issue, well, it's worth listening to what they have to say. In many ways, councils are the canary in the coal mine when it comes to government spending. And right now they're saying they just can't make the sums add up. So will the government cough up the cash? And would Labour do anything differently? We'll try and find out on the show tonight. First Sky's People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has been on the ground talking to councils and communities, trying to get a full picture of the financial strain that's facing local authorities. He joins us now. Nick, what have you been finding?
Well, today, it's worth just pausing and thinking how extraordinary it was. Here we had council leaders from far and wide descending on Westminster to meet about the state of council finances. There's relentless pressure on council services, as you just described. Inflation's made everything so much more expensive. And let's be honest, some councils have completely mismanaged their finances. They've either made poor investments or poor decisions. And so they came together today to try and figure it out. They are really, really desperate. One council leader said to me that he thinks in the next year, maybe 2, we could see the collapse of the local government system. Now, frankly, that's unlikely. It's too big to fail. Councils do far too much. But they are, one after another, declaring themselves effectively bankrupt, saying they don't have enough money to run the services that they want. So we went to Birmingham this week, a council that had issued one of these effective bankruptcy notices. They're skint, they're trying to sell everything off, but the communities there are using the law to protect their libraries and their community centres, and they say to the council, keep your hands off. So we went to speak to some of these communities. It's tea and social afternoon in the Sons of Rest Community Centre in the middle of Handsworth Park in Birmingham. But this council building and hundreds of other places like parks, libraries and landmarks could be sold off to make money because the council is effectively bankrupt.
This is a jewel in the crown, this place. It contributes to social cohesion. If you ever want an example of a multiracial society, which is under a lot of pressure at the moment, working, look at this one. You get rid of this, where do we go?
The community is now using the law to register places like this as assets of community value to make it harder for the council to sell them.
What's your message to the council if it starts to eye up your nice little building here?
Well, keep your hands off, really, because this is a community place, you know, it's a valuable community place. And the message is not just to the council, but it's to central government and whoever comes in, is that, you know, resources should be properly resourced.
One by one, it appears councils in England are going bust. In July 2021, Slough Council issued what's called a Section 114 notice, effectively declaring itself bankrupt. More followed: Croydon, Woking, Thurrock, then Birmingham, and more recently Nottingham. Others are warning the same could happen to them, including Stoke-on-Trent, Middlesbrough, Somerset, Bradford and Cheshire East. Birmingham City Council told us it'll work with the community as it faces unprecedented financial challenges.
So what are their options here? Well, they could start to raise local taxes or cut services, or as the biggest landowner around here, they're already starting to sell off property. It's a bit like that stage in Monopoly when you've run out of money and your only option left is to get rid of your assets.
The future looks bleak. The local government association says 1 in 5 councils in England think they could go into effective bankruptcy this year or next. And that's bad news for the communities caught in the middle. Nick Martin, Sky News, Birmingham.
Well, joining us now are two people who are really on the front line of local government. Stephanie Chambers, the leader of Gloucester City Council, and Stephen Holt, leader of Eastbourne Council. Thanks both for being with us. You had this big event today, didn't you, in the House of Commons? Yeah. I think, Stephen, you hosted it. Yeah. You're Lib Dem council leader from Eastbourne. What was the point of the event today?
So really today was a chance for us to explain to everybody and to educate people, I suppose, as to the real financial crisis that is being caused by the cost of temporary accommodation in the UK. Just in Eastbourne alone, 49p of every pound that we raise in council tax in Eastbourne is spent on temporary accommodation.
49p?
49p.
Every pound of council tax is on temporary accommodation?
Absolutely, which is just completely unsustainable for councils going forwards. And we're not alone in that. And that was why we had 50 councils from across the political spectrum join us today to meet and talk this through.
It's important, the point you make, that this is across the political spectrum. You're a Lib Dem, Stephanie, you're a Conservative from a Conservative-run council. Are you saying that the government needs to stump up more money, effectively?
I think that's one of the answers, yes. There's no more funding needed for local governments to tackle this situation. But I think it's bigger than that. The housing crisis needs to be addressed because one of the main issues, although we're having more people present as homeless, one of the issues is the bottleneck within the system. So there's not enough houses for people to move into. There's no move-on accommodation, particularly for families that need larger properties.
And you were saying to me earlier off air how, you know, these are often working families, you know, that they've got parents in work that try and do the right thing, but because of the rising cost of living or the, like you say, the squeeze on housing, they just can't afford a home for their family.
Yeah, and I think the general public generally think of homelessness as being rough sleepers on the streets, you know, but that's just the visible element of homelessness. There's more to homelessness, and there's families and there's children in temporary accommodation, and the damage to what that does to children and families is unended, you know, and they can end up being the rough sleepers of the future. So to be preventative, we need to tackle that situation now.
And just to, I guess, zoom out slightly, there's huge funding pressures on councils, isn't there? What kind of thing are councils having to do? You know, we're seeing some who've effectively declared themselves bust. Is there services that are going to be cut?
Absolutely. That's the real worry that we have, is that there's a key issue here, which is councils are there to provide a safety net. And if we're not really careful, that safety net's going to collapse. And that has a huge social impact for everybody, as well as a financial impact on local
What do you mean
authorities.
by the safety net collapsing? What does that look like?
If we can't support families in temporary accommodation, what does that mean? But also it's about the community grants that we offer to organisations such as the Food Bank, such as Salvation Army, who support our local homeless community as well. This is a real root and branch approach, and what we need to do is work with national government to find solutions that we can implement locally. We need government to listen.
Is there a pressure on councils to put up council tax as well? You know, something that obviously people don't want to see at a time of cost pressures.
there is a pressure to do that, but, you know, we are restricted to how much we can put up council tax. And, you know, everybody's facing a cost of living crisis. You know, people can't afford it. So we need to look at bigger measures from bigger funding pots.
And if that doesn't happen, will we see more councils going bust, do you think?
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely fair to say. You know, we're doing everything we can. I want to make really clear in Eastbourne, we're doing everything we can to ensure we can settle a balanced budget. But with 49p of spend and temporary accommodation and council tax, that's not sustainable going forwards in the future. So we really need government to listen to us, step up and, frankly, meet with us so that we can work on a bigger solution. OK,
thanks very much for coming on the programme today, both of you. Thank you. Now, in a moment, I'll be speaking to the Policing Minister, Chris Philp, and asking him what to do about the difficult state of local government finances. But we're going to start by discussing the police. Now, this is after a mass screening of more than 300,000 police officers, staff and volunteers against a national intelligence database has led to only 9 criminal investigations. Now, the 9, who are officers and staff, are being investigated for alleged sex and drug crimes and fraud. Well, the review, which the government says is the largest ever integrity screening project, was carried out after a damning report into the police, which, of course, followed the murder of Sarah Everard by serving Metropolitan Police Officer Wayne Cousins. Now, the review found 461 cases classed as sufficiently serious to need assessing by a senior officer. 88 cases led to a disciplinary investigation, and out of that, there have been 9 criminal investigations. Others had their vetting reviewed, faced management intervention, or required no further action.
This is a small number of people. There was 461 people in total out of those 307,000 members of the workforce who were referred into an appropriate authority for a decision to be made. So I think what I can do is reassure our communities that, you know, they can trust policing. The majority of our workforce do have the absolute integrity and are committed to keeping our communities safe.
Well, the Crime and Policing Minister, Chris Philp, joins us now to talk a bit more about this. Thank you for being with us. So just explain why the screening was carried out.
Well, we're determined to make sure that only people who deserve to carry the badge and wear the uniform do so. There have been a number of quite concerning cases over recent years. So we were determined to make sure that we'd looked under every stone, we'd shone a light into every corner. And that's why we commissioned about a year ago this screening of every single police officer and member of police staff and special constable, everybody working in the policing system, over 300,000 people, to check all of the databases and make sure that nothing had been overlooked. That exercise was completed and the results were announced today. And as Chief Constable Serena Kennedy said in your clip there were 461 officers out of the 300,000 who needed further investigation, of which 9 merited criminal investigation. So I think it's important we take action in those cases, but we should also keep in mind that means that in 99.85% of cases there was no new information uncovered. So we should keep in mind that the vast majority of officers are brave, dedicated and hard-working, but where their conduct doesn't meet the high standards the public rightly expect, we will take action.
Do you think it sounds a bit complacent, you know, from you, but also, you know, as you said, Chief Constable Serena Kennedy? Oh, it's great, you know, only a small number of people have committed crimes before and were sort of let through. I mean, most people would say, hang on a minute, how on earth is someone a serving police officer or a member of the police who this has happened to?
Yeah,
None of them have criminal investigations.
When one is one too many. So we're making a number of changes. So the first thing we're doing is we're funding the police force to continue doing these checks on an ongoing basis. That's the first thing. We're also changing the rules around dismissals to give chief constables like Serena Kennedy more power to dismiss officers where misconduct issues arise. We're changing the rules to make sure that the vetting status has to be held on a continuous, ongoing basis. So we're really raising the standards across the board to make sure the public can have confidence, which they rightly expect.
We've had, as you said, lots of stories in recent years, from the awful case of Sarah Everard to WhatsApps, being released showing a pretty misogynistic or racist attitudes among the police. I'm interested on your perspective, because you're policing minister, you've been out meeting police. Do you think there is a cultural problem in police?
So I think in some areas there is, but we're determined to deal with that, to root it out. Chief constables are determined to as well. And this, data washing exercise, looking at over 300,000 people, is designed to do that, to make sure that standards are met, not just mostly, but always.
Why do you think this culture has been allowed to grow? Do you think it's because some people are attracted to the police for the wrong reasons? Do you think it because they're, I guess, looking after their own, it hasn't been properly dealt with in the past?
Well, I think there's an element of both of those things. When you get small groups of people who work together in difficult circumstances, sometimes you get cultures, sort of insular cultures forming. But I think it is worth just emphasising to the public and to police officers watching, the vast majority of officers are decent, brave and hard-working. But in these small minority of cases, we're determined to have zero tolerance. Because if someone's wearing the uniform, they're able to they've got a power of arrest, they're wearing the badge. We do want the very, very high standards. Those haven't always been met in the past, but with initiatives like this, not just a one-off data washing exercise, but doing this on an ongoing, continuous basis, I think should give the public a lot more confidence going forward that these issues have been gripped.
OK. We've been talking on the programme about the pressures on local councils. We've seen several councils going bust. We just heard from a Lib Dem and a Conservative councillor talking about unsustainable funding pressures. They need help, they say, from the government. Is that help coming?
Well, first of all, a couple of points. Firstly, last year, council funding went up by, I think, about 5 billion or around about 10%. Next year, it's going up by, I think, about 4 billion.
What about
Let me finish. So over 2 years, that's a 16.5% increase in the funding available to councils. That's quite a big increase. On some of the councils that have gone bankrupt, one of which, by the way, is Croydon, the borough that I represent.
I am going to come in then, if I may, because just to comment on the figures, because I accept your point that funding's gone up, but pressures have gone up too, right? Inflation pressures. They're talking there about the pressure on housing. 49p in every pound spent in Eastbourne Council on temporary housing. So you can't just look at these figures in isolation.
Yeah, I mean, 16.5% over 2 years is broadly the same as inflation over that same period. There certainly are pressures with housing, temporary housing, that the Eastbourne leader referred to that do need to be addressed. But on some of those councils that went bust, one of which was the council I represent in Parliament, Croydon, which under its previous Labour administration went spectacularly bankrupt, like other councils such as Slough. Now, the reason for that wasn't government funding. It was because the Labour administration in those two councils speculated recklessly with public money. They bought a hotel that went bankrupt. They bought a shopping centre. They wasted £90 million refurbishing the Fairfield halls that barely looked any different afterwards. That wasn't, an accident. It wasn't government funding. It was the incompetence of that Labour administration in Croydon. The same happened in Slough. Birmingham, the example you showed, there was some enormous court case they lost to do with underpaying female workers that cost them hundreds of millions of pounds. So if you look at some of those individual councils, there are stories of bad government, bad management, certainly the case in Croydon, which explain the bankruptcy. But look, I know...
So is that the message then? Incompetent councils, and actually you've had loads of money recently, so, I think
that's not quite what I said, is it? I think some of those examples, like Croydon and Slough, certainly are bad management locally. But look, I know that Michael Gove and the team in DLUC, will always listen to council leaders and engage closely to make sure...
And Conservative MPs, 44 of them, are saying that you need to stamp up more money.
Look, Michael Gove's a very reasonable cabinet minister. As you know, he will always listen to local authority leaders.
He's worried as well, apparently.
And members of Parliament.
OK. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the attacks on the Houthis as well, something that the Prime Minister has been speaking about today in the House of Commons. I guess my question is, what's the end game here? Is it to keep bombing the Houthis until they don't exist anymore, or until we kind of cross their fingers and say that, they're going to stop attacking us? What's the end game? Well,
I mean, the principal objective is a limited and precise objective, which is to stop the Houthis attacking civilian shipping going through those straits, the Red Sea. Right, that's the shipping, civilian shipping, many different countries involved. They must stop attacking those civilian ships. And the purpose of the action that the Americans have taken, that we've taken, supported by many other countries as well, is to prevent those attacks. So our message to the Houthis is stop attacking shipping in the Red Sea, and then the attacks on their military bases will stop as well. It's very simple, very straightforward.
But what if they don't listen?
Well, then, in that case, the military action that we and the Americans and others are taking is designed to degrade their military capability to the point that they can't launch attacks anymore. They've got missile launching sites, they've got military facilities. We're targeting those, and the intention is to ultimately put them out of action if the Houthis don't desist. And if they're put out of action, they won't be able to attack innocent civilian shipping anymore.
OK. Now, there's just one final thing I wanted to talk to you about, and it's something that we covered on the show last night. It was basically from some... the rape campaigners, Rape Crisis and other women's groups who were saying that they want an amendment to the Victims Bill because at the minute, if you report a rape and your counselling notes can then be requested by the court. So they're saying that this is, very difficult for victims and survivors of rape to know that what they say in these very, very vulnerable moments, that could then potentially be used against them in a court of law. Is that something that you think should be looked at?
Well, we do need to consider that very carefully and very sensitively. Rape conviction rates are, frankly, too low. Police referrals to the CPS have gone up by 134% in the last 4 years, but it is still too low, so more needs to be done. Victim confidence, in particular, is something we need to work on. That sort of very personal information that you just mentioned should only be looked at by a court when strictly necessary. There are already quite a few controls over that disclosure, but I'm sure ministers in the Ministry of Justice will consider these requests very carefully, because we do need to make sure, of course, justice needs to be done. Information the court needs to see to reach a fair verdict does need to be disclosed. But when it comes to this very sensitive personal information, that should only be disclosed and used where necessary, and we need to make sure the rules do reflect that.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Chris Philp, thank you. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, Rishi Sunak says the UK will not hesitate to launch further airstrikes against Houthi rebels if attacks on ships in the Red Sea continue. But will the strikes work? What is the endgame? We'll debate that next.
Well, we've been doing them for years, to be fair. And we fill them with slow braised beef brisket, toad in the oils, vegetarian toads, lamb shanks. Well, anything that will go in there with gravy, to be fair. But yeah, the secret is a great mix. The oven's got to be set at 210 degrees. That's the way we tried and tested it. And we basically use a cake tin. And well, they don't always come out perfect, but we try as best. Oh, they do get a little soggy bottom sometimes, to be fair. It depends how big they are, if you know what I mean. But once you put the gravy in anyway, they're always going to get a soggy bottom, aren't they, love? I've had so many messages of people. I'm not sure if anybody's actually got here yet, but I've had people from Leeds, Bristol, you name it, everywhere, wanting to come and have them. To be fair, it's been a local dish for years, because I've been here for 15 years, and there's so many people had them over the years. We used to have a pan in the pub, but we've got rid of that, and I used to say our famous toad in the oil. So, yeah, I'm actually overwhelmed with how many people have just been contacting us, and obviously social media has just gone a little bit crazy, to be fair.
Hello, welcome back. Rishi Sunak made the case for more airstrikes in the Red Sea to MPs today. He told the House of Commons that the UK is not seeking a confrontation, but it is prepared to launch further strikes if attacks on shipping continue. The second round of joint attacks carried out by the US and UK against Houthi rebels came after the Iranian-backed group defied a warning to stop targeting ships. But the Prime Minister said the attacks couldn't go unchallenged.
Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear. We are not seeking a confrontation. We urge the Houthis and those who enable them to stop these illegal and unacceptable attacks. But if necessary, the United Kingdom will not hesitate to respond again in self-defence. We cannot stand by and allow these attacks to go unchallenged.
Rishi Sunak there. Well, let's bring in our duo for the night, shall we? The former Labour MP, former Deputy Mayor of London, Labour candidate, Heidi Alexander, and the former Defence Secretary and Conservative MP, Liam Fox. Great to have you both on the programme today. Liam, to you first, as a kind of former Defence Secretary. We spoke to Chris Philp earlier. He said that the end game here is to try and get the attacks to stop, and then if that doesn't work, to degrade the Houthis. Is that actually an end game?
Well, the end game, of course, is the disengagement of Iran with its proxies in the region. So you've now got Iran operating through its proxies Hamas in Gaza. You've got them operating through their proxies Hezbollah in Syria and Lebanon. And now you've got the Houthis in the Red Sea. Iran doesn't want there to be peace between the Arab states and Israel because Iran doesn't want Israel to exist. And Iran believes in its own hegemony in the region. So Iran is the root of the problem here. The Houthis are the symptoms of the problem. Yes, we need to continue to enforce international law and work with the big, broad international coalition. We've now got 20 countries in the Red Sea. It's important for global trade. It's important for things like medicines passing through the Red Sea back to Europe, including Britain. So we're absolutely right to be defending international law in this way. We don't want to be in this confrontation, but they have chosen to have it.
What's your take on this? Do you back the airstrikes?
Yeah, so we do. And, clearly we need to protect British interests, and you can't have a situation where you've got non-state actors like the Houthis launching missiles on shipping vessels. It's a very, very important route for international shipping, and you can't expect to do that and for there not to be repercussions. So the Labour Party very much does support the action.
Yeah. And Liam, you mentioned Iran. I guess for some viewers they might be thinking, hang on a minute, this is a bit hairy, isn't it? We're kind of effectively bombing an arm of Iran. We don't want to just stumble into a conflict with them, do we?
Well, what's the alternative? To not respond to the attacks. Iran has tried to disrupt peace in the region. We have to respond to those elements of that directly affect our national interests, not least the fact that they're firing on the Royal Navy there. So we do need to respond to that. But we do need to see the issue in its wider context. The government are right that this is a single issue that they're responding to, but it's a single issue that's part of a wider picture where we need to have, I think, a much wider view of the regional conflict and really constantly keep reasserting that this is an international coalition of a lot of countries. This is not the US and the UK acting on our own.
I guess another thing that our viewers might be thinking is this all just a waste of money? At the beginning of the programme, we started talking about councils and the funding pressure that councils are under, services having to be cut, council tax being raised, councils really, really worried about effectively making ends meet. And then if you look at, an expensive military campaign, is this the best use of taxpayers' money?
Well, I think if we don't act and you end up seeing shipping containers and vessels having to detour around the whole of Africa, what people would actually see is huge additional expense in a number of the products that they're buying in the UK. So I understand why you asked the question, Sophie, but I think it is necessary action. It needs to be proportionate action. And so, this we have to find a way of making it stop, because otherwise that cost is going to end up being borne by people when they're buying goods and products in the UK.
Lots of nodding along.
I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. If we don't act, not only do we have a security threat, but we could have another bite of inflation. How does that help councils or anyone else?
OK, thank you both very much indeed, Heidi and Liam. More for them coming up, because coming up next on the Politics Hub, it is make or break for Nikki Haley in the New Hampshire primary tonight. Will Donald Trump's storm sweep her aside in the race to secure the Republican nomination? welcome back to US politics now and the primaries. The former UN ambassador Nikki Haley is the last candidate standing between Donald Trump and the Republican nomination. And tonight she faces a make-or-break test in the New Hampshire primary. Well, we can speak now to Sky News' US election commentator Michael Wolff, who is in Washington for us. What are we expected to see tonight?
We're expected to see Nikki Haley lose and exit the race. Is there any chance that that won't happen, of a sudden upset? Not a very big chance.
Not a very big chance. Do you think Donald Trump is effectively unstoppable now, then?
I think Donald Trump has been effectively unstoppable for the better part of the past year.
And what is it about him that he manages to, I guess, shrug off things that would completely derail any other politician?
Well, you've asked the central question of our time, and I'm not sure that the answer is available. I mean, it is something that we have never seen before. It's a phenomenon that I would say is outside of politics. And that may be the issue here. We look at Donald Trump as a political creature. We analyze him in terms of the standards and models of politics, but it is clearly something else entirely.
Yeah, I think that's right, isn't it? It's almost as if we are almost flummoxed by it because we're trying to apply the usual standards to a man who's consistently defied them. You say he's effectively unstoppable.
No.
Sorry.
I mean, as political commentators and political pundits, all of us have been incredibly handicapped here. We just don't come up with the right answers because we don't have any other example to judge him against.
You say that he's effectively unstoppable in the race to receive the Republican nomination. How about the race for the White House itself? How do you see that playing out?
Well, I'm at this juncture, sitting here at this point, I would say 50-50. I mean, there's, as they say, that's a long time in politics, so a lot can happen. Where he's facing several. I mean, he has 4 indictments. There will be at least 1, probably 2 criminal trials that will happen before the election. So, does it change things if a jury finds him guilty of a criminal act? If he is a convicted criminal felon? We don't know the answer to that because we have never had to deal with the question.
And just finally, what will Nikki Haley be hoping for after tonight if she does exit the race? What will be the best prize for her?
Well, tonight she'll be hoping to come. I doubt if she is hoping to win, but she will be hoping to come as close as humanly possible to winning. If that's 5 points behind, I would say if she's 5 points behind, she'll claim that as a victory. Beyond that, after tonight, I think she probably has some hope that she will be the vice presidential pick for Donald Trump. I doubt that will happen, but I think she probably holds out that hope.
OK, thank you so much. Michael Wolff, always really interesting to get your perspective. Right, let's bring in Heidi and Liam, shall we? Heidi, Keir Starmer might be having to deal with Donald Trump if he becomes Prime Minister. How do you think he'll be feeling about that?
Well, I think it's the world of politics, isn't it? You have to deal with the events that are thrown at you. I mean, we know that the relationship between the UK and America is a long-standing one, a very important one. We share military, we share intelligence. We've been aligned sometimes in the recent past on military interventions. And so, we're going to have to find a way of dealing with one another. It's a very uncertain time, I think, globally, isn't it? And I think one of the things that worries me if Trump were to win the nomination and ultimately win the election, is when you've got problems in Ukraine, when he's got a position which is very equivocal about things like NATO. It doesn't feel to me like we're in a place at the moment in the world where we want America to be withdrawing from NATO or reducing its contributions to NATO. And so I think any government, be that a Labour government, if we're privileged enough to serve, or whether it's a Conservative government, is going to have to find a way of dealing with America, irrespective of who the president is.
I mean, you're a self-declared Nikki Haley fan, I think it's fair to say. Liam, are you preparing to be disappointed tonight?
I think she'll probably do quite well, relatively. I think Donald Trump will win, there's no question of that. The question for her will be, will she come close enough to survive till Super Tuesday on the 5th of March? But I think that Donald Trump is a phenomenon. I mean, I suppose if Jerry Springer, if Bill Clinton was the candidate for the Jerry Springer generation and Barack Obama was the candidate for the X Factor generation, who's the candidate for the reality TV generation? And Donald Trump is bigger than politics. His entire political being is almost a soap opera. I think what was interesting about the assessment is that people make the judgments from inside the bubble in Washington, in a country where a lot of different parts don't like Washington. And he is in many ways the anti-politics candidate for a lot of people in America, maybe not on the West Coast or the East Coast, but certainly a bulk in the middle. And that's where he draws his strength from. But Heidi is exactly right, that the special relationship, and having been Defence Secretary, you know this more than most, it's too important to belong to any two individuals or any two parties at any one time. It matters too much for our security and our well-being, not just us, but I think for the wider world. We
haven't got long left, but I'm going to ask a very cheeky question at the end of this, and that is to get you both to predict who would win out of Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Go on, Heidi. Who do you reckon would win that race?
Well, I've got to say Biden. Hope has to triumph.
Liam, what about you?
I think it would be very, very close, almost too close to call. I would think probably Donald Trump has a slight edge given the low levels of satisfaction with Biden. But I'm not so sure that this is exactly going to be the end game, because a lot of things can happen.
Yeah, it's a long race. There's a lot of twists and turns, I'm sure, to come. Thank you both very much for your analysis, Heidi and Liam. Now, Labour today called for a crackdown on school absences, citing figures that 1 in 3 children due to sit GCSEs are persistently absent from school. The party is pushing for a Children Not in School bill, which would set up a new council-maintained register of children not on school rolls. Well, I spoke to the Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. Thank you so much for being on the programme today. I'm keen to talk to you about absences from school, childcare, a whole host of education policies. But on the programme today, we've been covering funding pressures on local councils. So I did want to just start off with that. One of the people that we heard from is Michael Jones. He's a Labour councillor from Crawley Borough Council. I think we can just hear what he told our correspondent Nick Martin earlier today.
We are, as a council, are currently looking at significant cuts because the amount of money that we get from the government, the amount of money that they will allow us as a maximum to raise council tax by is insufficient to cover the overall costs of the services, possibly even statutory minimum services.
So we're talking about cuts to council services, council tax going up, councils going bust. Would Labour give councils more money?
Well, I hear that, what we just heard there from Crawley, everywhere I go. I mean, the economy is in a total mess, but even Conservative MPs are calling on their own government to back councils. What we've had over the last 14 years is really a hollowing out of so many of the services on which local people depend. And, in my community, that's meant that charities and others have stepped in.
So given
but it's
that,
not adequate.
Given that, would Labour give councils more money?
The record of the last Labour government was to invest in our local communities, but I can't make commitments right now, given the fact the economy is in a complete mess. We ended up with that ridiculous mini budget that crashed the economy. There will be some really tough choices ahead, but in some areas it is clear where actually relatively small amounts of public investment can make a significant difference, not just in terms of creating jobs, stimulating the local economy, but also better life chances for children too. And lots of pressures that councils are facing at the moment, for example, are around children with special educational needs and disabilities. And if we do more upfront when they're younger, then I think we could ultimately save councils money in the long run.
And I know how passionate you are about early intervention, early years education, which I do want to come on to. But honestly, I think a lot of councillors will listen to that and they'll be worried. They'll be like, look, hang on, we're in the red here. What are we going to do? And Labour aren't saying you're going to spend more than the Conservatives.
I recognise the pressures they're under, the frustrations that they're facing at the moment, but I think we saw what came of politicians making commitments they just couldn't honour. Those unfunded tax cuts, for example, that Liz Truss and the Conservatives delivered, that mean that every month people are paying more on their mortgages, people when they're remortgaging, ending up with higher rates. So you've got to take responsible and sensible decisions. But of course, we want to get to a position where local councils are able to provide the services that they are required to do in law, and many aren't, and that's why they're going to the wall.
Let's talk about persistent absence from school, something that's been going up since the pandemic. How worried are you about this, and what would you do to try and help the situation?
I'm incredibly concerned about what we're seeing around persistent absenteeism at the moment. It's 1 in 5 children who are regularly out of school at the moment. That's 1.5 million children across our country. If that continues, if we don't start to make progress on it, it's going to rise to 1 in 4. That's why I've been setting out Labour's long-term plan about how we make sure that children and families are properly supported. So government's got a role to play, and I've set out lots of measures around breakfast clubs, mental health support, more support for families. I know it's tough at the moment. But alongside that, we do need parents to do their bit too. And that message that every day at school really does matter has become lost. And we see, I think, a worrying drift in terms of attitudes from parents sometimes that it doesn't always matter to get your children to school every day. It does really matter for them, but also for the whole school too, because it disrupts the learning of other children.
It's interesting.
Teachers have to recover things again and again. It disrupts the pattern of learning.
It's interesting. So you are up front saying, actually, poor parenting is a factor here.
I'm being upfront about the fact that it's a complex issue that we're going to have to work together to fix, and that parents, alongside government, alongside schools, have got responsibilities. It's about a partnership. It's about working together. We've got a very fractured relationship at the moment between government and schools, and also between schools and families. But I do think there's more that government could do to make life easier for families, like cutting the cost of school uniforms. I've said that schools shouldn't be insisting on very large numbers of branded items. For example, that costs parents a fortune, puts pressure on that relationship between schools and families. Alongside that, universal free breakfast clubs in our primary schools, so easing that pressure on families, but also better outcomes for children. I mean, the evidence is clear that breakfast clubs are about the club, not just the breakfast. Better attendance, better outcomes overall.
Childcare, nurseries, another huge issue across the country for lots of families, and one actually very popular, I think, government policy is to extend the free hours that you're entitled to parents of 2-year-olds from April. There's been a few concerns around this policy, whether parents can access the codes they need, whether nurseries have got the staff to make it happen. How worried are you about the way it's being rolled out?
Well, I am concerned, and it's clear that the Treasury are concerned about this. And, we've seen them, Treasury sources voicing their concerns about, I won't repeat the language they used, about how it's not working at the moment. I mean, this is what comes of the Chancellor rushing into a decision in the last budget, after I've been doing all the running on this issue to make the case for childcare and early education. But where we get to with the current government is a pledge and no plan to make it happen. I'm determined that a Labour government will be different. And that's why I've asked Sir David Bell, who was formerly the Chief Inspector of Ofsted, to lead Labour's early years review on this. So how do we make sure we deliver more places, higher quality, and also the workforce we need? A big part of this at the moment, and why the government are really struggling, is that we haven't got a plan around workforce, and we're not creating the places that we need.
I think I'm a 39-year-old mum, so I feel like childcare is kind of my sort of mastermind specialist subject, to be honest. And what I hear an awful lot from parents is, I pay a fortune for childcare, the staff don't get paid much, the quality isn't great. What's going on? Why isn't this all adding up?
Because what we're getting to a position when this reform will work through is that over 80% of childcare spend in this country is funded directly from the government, but they're not using that to drive up standards in the sector. If we're spending all of that public money, why are we not making sure we're delivering better progression and pay for staff?
Why are we not?
Partly because in this country, well, there are lots of reasons driving it. Part of it is we do spend less than other countries. Part of it is also that we've got a different model where it comes to the operation of it. We have a mixed market, that's fine. But I think the focus we need is on how we better connect early years education and childcare into the school system. So connecting that more effectively so that when children arrive at school, they're ready to go. At the moment, lots of children are arriving, especially post-pandemic, worrying reports about children arriving, not being able to communicate properly, in some cases still not having learned how to use the toilet. That's where really great early education can come into.
Rishi Sunak's flagship education policy, or one of them, is maths to 18. You, of course, are someone who said we should focus on the early years. Would you keep the maths to 18 policy if you do become Education Secretary after the election?
Well, it won't have happened because there isn't the time for the government to deliver on this. And
so will you keep the policy? That's why it matters, right? What you think?
Well, it won't have happened and there isn't the time to do it before the election. It's not deliverable. I mean, we don't have enough maths teachers to teach kids to GCSE at the moment. Chances are there's a strong possibility that if your child is studying for maths GCSE, they're not being taught by a maths specialist. 1 in 10 maths lessons not being delivered by a specialist. It's not the area I think that needs the greatest attention. If we're to make the biggest impact in children's lives, I believe it's when children are younger. And that's why early years, for me, if I were Education Secretary, would be my #1 priority. It's where we can make the biggest impact.
So you ditch the policy? That's really what you're saying,
well, it won't have, I mean, frankly, there won't be anything to ditch because it won't have happened.
But you won't bring it in then?
Well, the government know this. And, you know, instead of focusing...
You wouldn't bring it in as a policy then? It would just float away?
It would not be where I would focus my energies, no. I think if we want to inspire children to really love maths and to engage with maths, then a bigger push around early years and primary numeracy is what we should be doing. It's no good if children have given up at 6, insisting they study it beyond 16, and that's the kind of ridiculous position that we've got to with the government right now.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bridget Phillipson, they're the Shadow Education Secretary. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. Lindsay Hoyle had a bit of a go at Rishi Sunak today for failing to inform MPs again ahead of military action in Yemen. We're talking grumpy speakers. That's next.
breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. शांति से इनको समझाओ वरना ये हम लोग It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. The House of Commons can be a bit like a playground. MPs, despite being grown men and women, aren't above shouting at each other, laughing, there's even tears sometimes, and trying to keep control of proceedings is the Speaker. And he or she, well, they have their work cut out, let's say that. But much like a frazzled parent, however noisy and unpleasant it gets, they're protective of it. And today, Lindsay Hoyle criticised the Prime Minister for not giving Parliament a chance to have its say over military action. So we thought we'd bring you sometimes the Speaker has taken MPs to task for not respecting the green benches.
Order! Order! I find it totally unacceptable that once again, that we see Downing Street running roughshod over members of Parliament.
Points of order are getting totally out of hand. They are no longer points of order. They are points because honourable members tend to think we are still on television.
It is not right for everybody to be briefed. It's not more important to go on the news in the morning. It's more important to come here.
Quite frankly, young man, you can like it or lump it. You need to write out 1,000 times. I will behave myself at Prime Minister's questions.
Who do you think you're speaking to, Secretary of State? I don't want. I think we need to understand each other. I am the defender of this House and these benches on both sides. I am not going to be spoken to by a Secretary of State who is absolutely not accepting my ruling. Take it with good grace.
Prime Minister has finished, and he can take it from me that he's finished.
Oh, thank you. I love the footage of Betty Booth for it, I have to say. Absolute legend. Great footage as well. I'm not even sure where to start after that. It was a real riot, a real romp through. Liam, have you ever been told off by the Speaker?
Not really. Once I was told for being late as a minister, and I couldn't respond because I was so out of breath at the time that I was sort of struck silent. I mean, speakers are allowed to be cross as long as they're consistent and as long as they're impartial politically.
Cross to everyone, equally.
It does. And the Speaker is the defender of the members of Parliament. But the government is there to govern, Parliament is there to hold the government to account, and the Speaker is kind of the referee.
How about you? Ever been rapped on the knuckles by a Speaker?
I don't think I have, but I can remember getting Therese Coffey into a lot of trouble once with the Speaker.
Oh, really?
Because
What happened?
she was looking at her phone constantly during a debate, and the Speaker told her to put it down, and then she didn't put it down. And so just watching that footage just takes you straight back there, and it just reminded me when I'm in schools and you try and explain how it all works, the word I use about the Speaker is they're like the referee.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Kind of abuse from all sides as well.
Yeah,
I can totally see that. On the specific issue about the Prime Minister not telling Parliament before the attacks, do you think that's a problem?
No. The government has a right to do what is necessary in the national interest. That, remember, was over a weekend. Prime Minister did come to the House on the Monday, so I think that's reasonable. He did brief the Speaker and the Leader of the Opposition, which, when the government hasn't set out its policy for military action, is reasonable. But I don't think the Speaker or the Leader of the Opposition can expect that they're briefed every time there's going to be another bit of military action. I was Secretary of State during the Afghanistan and the Libyan conflicts. We set out what the government's policy was, and then we're accountable in Parliament from time to time, as the government will be tomorrow during a debate on the Red Sea.
What about you, Heidi?
So I understand that when you're Prime Minister and you're in government, there will be occasions when you need the flexibility to act, and that isn't consistent with the parliamentary timetable. And I actually think this occasion was one of them. And so, you know, and there's precedent, isn't there? Yeah. Theresa May, when she took action against Assad back in 2018, when he was using chemical weapons, despite having meant to have got rid of them, she didn't seek a parliamentary vote on that. I think there will be different contexts to each type of military intervention, and I think that may require different decision-making processes in Parliament at that time. But I do think the government has behaved in a reasonable manner on this occasion.
Talking about the speakers again, who's the grumpiest speaker, do you think?
Becca.
Really?
No
yeah,
question.
I think I'd probably agree with that.
Really? Any particular incidents that stand out?
I remember once saying to John Bercow, when 649 other politicians think you're egocentric, you might consider you've got a problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just always remember Tim Loughton, the Conservative MP, incurring the wrath of John Bercow in a big way. And I was transported back watching that, thinking, I'm sure he was telling Tim Loughton off at that point.
Yeah, you can see that. You can see the kind of fury.
Exactly.
And also mad, but at the same time, you know, you do kind of bring it on your sounds a little bit sometimes, MPs. Like PMQs, you always get the kind of naughty corner, you know, I remember, like, the MPs who, like, sit on the gangway, you know, hurling abuse, hoping they don't get spotted by the Speaker.
It's also a little bit of theatre. You remember, for the Speaker, this is peak viewing time for the Speaker as well. So I think, and particularly I thought with John Bercow, there was a little bit of playing to the gallery at times during PMQs. And who's to say that's wrong? They're also elected MPs, after all.
The most incredible vocabulary, though, that man had, didn't he?
Was,
I mean, just incredible.
We do like a bit of theatre. Always a good bit of theatre in politics. That's it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it's the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, followed by The World with Yalda Hakim.